Members come from every state in the Union. They are, for the most part, people incarcerated and their loved ones. A strong argument could be made that they are, unfortunately, the most economically disadvantaged segment in our society today. The number of people affected by the prison experience is staggering. Although we only have 5% of the world's population, we incarcerate 25% of the world's prisoner population. A recent study points out that 1 in 100 persons in our country is now in prison. Thus, it would not surprise you that CURE was one of the many organizations that celebrated this year's passage of the Second Chance Act. This act is an acknowledgement of just how important after-prison support is and how it must begin in prison. Our members understand this need on a very personal level. People being released know they need crucial social support which loved ones in the free world often provide. In fact, studies show that if persons stay connected to their families while in prison, they have a 6 times better chance of not recidivating. But, Mr. Chairman, sustaining these vital family ties is not easy. Visiting is not always possible because of the cost of travel, especially now with such high gas prices. Although letter writing is important, phone calls are the main method used to sustain this all-important connection. And this leads to the issue I wish to discuss, the high cost of prison phone calls. For more than 10 years, CURE has been working to reduce these costs. In 2000, we organized a nationwide campaign, the Equitable Telephone Charges Campaign, to mobilize family members of prisoners and others concerned citizens to advocate for changes. And this campaign continues today. It has been a long campaign, but we are proud of the fact that we have seen substantial progress. When we started, only 6 states offered a reduced rate debit calling system as an option to the expensive collect calls. Now 20 states have a debit or prepaid option at reduced rates. Despite the progress in many areas, there is one area that continues to be very troubling, and that is the high cost of interstate phone calls for many state prison systems. The reason these calls are so expensive is because the contracted phone company pays the prison system a commission for each call. These commissions can be as high as 60%. But there are some states that have made pro-family decisions to make interstate phone systems much less costly. For example, family-friendly systems like Florida charge only $1.80 for a collect and $1.62 for debit or prepaid. In contrast, Washington State charges $17.41 for a 15-minute interstate call with no reduction in debit or prepaid. The handout that I have attached to my statement shows the latest information we have compiled on these interstate rates. Keep in mind that all of these systems have similar security features. Thus, there is no logical explanation for these significant differences. We have not been alone in our efforts and would like to take this opportunity to thank Congressman Bobby Rush for his leadership on trying to solve this problem by assuring affordability to those families who have loved ones in prisons. He introduced the Family Telephone Connection Protection Act last Congress and again this Congress, which is H.R. 555 on the table. We have a brochure on this piece of legislation. This legislation would authorize the Federal Communications Commission to 1, prescribe maximum rates, 2, require both collect and debit calling, 3, prohibit commissions, 4, require competition, and 5, prohibit cell blocking solely because there is not a billing agreement in place. In closing, I want to express again how vital it is for prisoners and their families to be able to communicate with each other. I would like to end with a very example of an extremely moving study that involved Walter Lomax, who spent 39 years in prison and was found innocent. His family stayed in contact with him by visiting, writing, and phone calls, and also he even, in a way, walked his daughter down the aisle when she married. At her wedding, a relative held up a cell phone, switched to speaker mode. Mr. Lomax listened on the other end from a phone in a Maryland prison. When the minister asked who was there to give his daughter Wanda away, it was Mr. Lomax who answered, "I do." Needless to say, we would be happy to work with the subcommittee to explore any and all possible solutions to making all interstate phone calls affordable for families of prisoners. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Sullivan, and thank you to your wife as well. And we do want to work with you. It's absolutely something that cannot continue. The chair will now recognize himself for a round of questions. And I want to begin with you, Mr. Lucas. Could you please elaborate, talk about what higher speed broadband can do for the classroom by way of course content, collaboration by students, and new applications?
Well, some of the things that we have experienced in the foundation are the fact that using the internet in order to teach the children to find information, assess that information, and find out what is true and what is not true, and then use that information creatively becomes the basis of sort of the 21st century school. It's very difficult now to teach all children all the facts, all the knowledge, everything they need to know. But what we can do is teach them how to learn and how to find information. The internet is absolutely crucial for that. We've had situations where people have been able to use the internet to get to universities, K through 12 students, to look through electron telescopes, to learn things, to help with their studies, to watch surgery in progress, and to watch NASA launch spaceships. It brings a whole wealth of information into the classroom. It also allows the students to work collaboratively with kids from other countries. And it also means that we can bring in experts from all kinds of institutions, be it from the Library of Congress or the NFL, into the classroom to help the students to understand what they're learning.
And could you talk to us a little bit more about this concept of free in terms of the service which you propose that be made available to children as the great equalizer in American society?
Well, again, we're moving ahead very fast, and wireless is the wave of the future. And if we're going to wireless, then you are assigning and or giving away, or however you want to describe it, frequencies to the phone companies and to the people who are using, you providing the service. My feeling is that as a part of that access to the public airways, that a certain amount of the service be restricted and said this is only allowed for educational institutions. Part of it, I feel that we have there's an example of a system in Glasgow, Scotland, that has an internet built through their schools and their whole educational system, which is is free to all the schools and all the students. It's a very powerful system, and I think that possibly an educational internet, a third internet, that is only for education and that is not charged and that the carriers cannot charge would be a rather simple way to solve the problem. The idea of taxing people and taking the money away and then giving it back seems like a very cumbersome way to do something that you're already, you're charging people to use the system as it is. So I mean, if you're making people pay for the right to have the frequencies, why don't you just say, well, you can have it for a little bit less, but you have to give the school something for free?
Thank you, Mr. Lucas. Mr. Ramsey, you say that low-income citizens adopt broadband at a much lower rate than higher incomes. Can you talk about the adoption part of the A trilogy, which you laid out here for us in terms of how that impacts the low-income community